Well, first let me thank you for getting this copy of Hank's Farm. I'm Larry Elk, and I had the pleasure of writing Hank's Farm primarily for my children. But Hank's Farm is about a farm that was located in Hayden, Missouri. But Hank's Farm ended up being a reality primarily because of Hank's father's farm, and that's what you're looking at right now. This particular farm was located in Jonesburg, Missouri, about an hour and a half west of St. Louis. That's my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, and my mom. And this is my sister Barbara pushing me on the sled. Barbara at that time was about 7 years old. I was around 3. Also in these pictures you saw 2 dogs. One of them was all black, and I think that was my grandparents' dog. And the black and white dog was Mike. Mike is the first dog I remember. There's a picture of Mike there, and my mom, Alice. So Jonesburg was bought by my grandfather in the late 40s. And this was either late 1948, early 1949. And my grandfather died in the summer of 1949. And you'll learn more about that as you go through the book. But this is my mom, and there's my dad on the pond. My dad always had a liking for things that were high-tech. I know he was one of the first ones to have an electronic calculator. And he was able to do some fancy things with those pictures. Now this is actually a picture of Hank's farm, my dad's farm in Hayden, Missouri. And we often went on hay rides, and this is a motorcycle my dad bought from Sears, of all places. And he bought that so he could go out and check the cattle when he and my mom would come down on the weekend. That's my brother Jim on the previous owner's tractor that came with the purchase of the farm. I believe this particular picture is looking at the cattle in what we call the clover field. And one of the first things you might notice about these cattle, as opposed to what you would have seen later on and what you'll see in the book, is that none of these animals have tags in their ears. And my father was a very number-oriented person, and he wanted to have an accounting of all of his animals. So all of our cattle eventually had tags. So this film indicates to me that this was probably in the spring of 1969. I was still in the service, had not yet seen the farm, and there's my brother Jim feeding the cattle what we called range checkers. My father used to get those in Rolla, Missouri, and then he would bring them out to the farm. And we did that so that the cattle would become comfortable around us and would be easier to handle later on. This is a picture of the upper barn and the upper barn lot. That's a picture of the lower barn and the older barn. That's where most of our hay was stored until we eventually built a metal loafing shed. You saw a picture of some firewood. That's Fanny, my mom and dad's dog, and Lad, my sister Barbara's dog, and her husband Don's dog. The farm was really in rough condition when my parents bought it. There had been very, very little maintenance done to the place the last few years that the previous owners the Minses owned it. But this is my brother-in-law Don driving the tractor. Don had some farming experience coming from southern Missouri. And the tractor drove well. It was a good tractor. And again, I believe this is the terrace field. Shelby at that time, Shelby Mins, and his wife Audrey probably had about 40 cows when my dad bought the place. The fences were just in terrible condition, and there was a lot of work ahead to do to bring the farm up to par. Most of the animals were very comfortable in eating food right out of our hand. And my mother was always a very strong animal lover, so it was just a matter of time before she got all of these animals to be very comfortable around people. And my dad was an animal lover as well. But the cattle looked like they were in good condition here. But one of the first things my dad did, he had the place fertilized, he had the ground lined, which I believe lowered the acidity of the soil. I believe he had a county agent come out and give him some advice. And the place really turned around quite rapidly, especially after we started to replace the fences. When you replaced the fences, you started controlling the managing of the farm instead of the cattle controlling the managing of the farm. Now this particular day was somewhat of a day in infamy. This is the day we got the ponies, and that's Gunny. And that was my dad taking one of the ponies, Gunny, off of the trailer, and then there was another pony that came with the deal, and his name was Silver. So that's everybody's petting Gunny. And Gunny was appropriately named because she was like a gunny sergeant. She was had a typical pony attitude. She ran the place, and so here's Silver being loaded at the same time. So Gunny and Silver were the only equines that we had on our place for about a year, and eventually we got a couple of quarter horses. And there's more information about the quarter horses and the ponies in the book. This is my nephew Andy sitting on the new Alice Chalmers tractor that my dad bought, trading in the old tractor that came with the farm. We eventually added a diesel tractor as well. Lots of weeds were growing up in the barnyard. We eventually had them all cut down, and the place really looked good. Now, the quality of this film tells me that I took this picture with a camera that I purchased when I was in the service. That was Debbie, Jack Dreyer, and my brother Jim. Debbie was married to Jim. And they are bringing in a load of round bales. This would have been some bales that I would have done during the week. This is our Purple Martin house, which we just absolutely loved. We had a good flock of Purple Martins that came back every year and just brought us a great deal of entertainment. And that's one of the calves considering coming into the barnyard. We had a couple of pigs, and I forget the whole story about these pigs, but they were rejected by their mother for some reason, and my mom and my wife at that time decided that they were going to raise these pigs, and sure enough, they ended up being very healthy animals, and I believe they were both females, and they ended up being sows that we kept in our small hog operation. But these characters were just like, dogs, except they got into more trouble than dogs would normally get into. This particular day, I actually remember it being very hot. This is Debbie playing with the pigs, trying to put the hat on the pigs. She liked being around the pigs, but she still had a little bit of fear of the pigs. And that was Sue, my wife at that time, coming over to rescue Debbie. That's a picture of the terrace field and looking down towards the lake field. And that's a picture of, I think, baby Penn. I'll tell you more about her a little bit later in the book. Here are the pigs in their own little pool, which my mother bought for them. My mom and dad were not living at the farm at that time. They were weekenders. And the pigs loved to go in the pool, cool off. And some of our neighbors, the traditionalists in that area, would stop by and see that we had these pigs out, and we're treating them like they were pets, and they just were quite surprised to see that particular type of attitude towards these hogs. But they were fun. Pigs are very smart and paid a lot of bills. For some reason we had a bicycle there. I don't ever recall ever riding it. That's my dad. That's Hank. Got his camera, was taking some pictures. And it was an aluminum rocker that we had in the backyard. This camera I would be looking west at that particular time. Now this is the three-wheel Honda that my dad bought about the first summer that I lived on the farm. That would have been in 1970. And looking at the behavior of the driver, that could be no one but my brother Jim. Jim loved coming down and riding the Honda. The Honda was great to go out and check the cattle. But here Jim is going out and harassing some of the calves. Cows really didn't mind the little vehicle, but if you went after them with it, they didn't like it. The sewing machine was very quiet, and you could go out and check the cattle very fast. Often I would use it to do just that, but many times I would actually take the horse. Now very close to our farm was the Gasconade River, and this is Barbara and Don on the Gasconade. This was a float trip that we took, and this particular trip would normally last, well, depending on how many breaks you took and the length of your lunch, but it would normally take about 6 to 7 hours. And this was the scene you looked forward to observing, because that was where the float trip ended. So after all that paddling and having a good time and swimming and having lunch, that's where you basically pulled the boats in, and the float trip company then came and picked up the boats. And this particular picture was of my last week at the University of Missouri at Rolla. I was coming home, it was a beautiful day, and I decided to go up into a fire tower, and I wanted to take a picture of our part of that particular area. And this would have been looking in the direction of the farm, but it was just an absolutely gorgeous area that was going from Vienna to Dixon, Missouri, and that would have been towards the direction of our farm. And that's a picture of the Cortina that we had at the farm. I bought the Cortina in Massachusetts, took it to Hawaii, and eventually had it at the farm as well.